Hello everyone, my name is Doug Drydale. I'm the CEO of Cybin. Thank you to the Maxim team for the opportunity to present at the conference, and thank you to everyone listening for your interest in the company. Much appreciated. Cybin was founded in 2019 with a mission to engineer a paradigm shift in the way that mental health disorders like depression and addiction are treated, moving away from daily chronic dosing with treatments that for many patients are barely better than placebo, to intermittent, infrequent dosing with psychedelic therapeutics that have been shown to have potential to relieve patients of their depressive symptoms or their addictive cravings for many months at a time from just one or two doses. So clearly an enormous paradigm shift if we can make that happen. At Cybin, we've been working to engineer classical psychedelic molecules into approvable, prescribable therapeutics for these mental health disorders, working with analogs and derivatives of psilocybin and DMT and MDMA to overcome some of the limitations of those classical molecules. Many of you will know that psilocybin is a prodrug and requires metabolism into psilocin, the active ingredient, in order to be effective. However, that requirement for metabolism leads to a number of challenges with psilocybin. Time to peak effect can be 1.25 hours. Patients can spend 6 to 8 hours in a clinic during a treatment session. Obviously, those things are very challenging from a scale point of view. And we all metabolize molecules differently. And so there's evidence of meaningful interpatient variability, which might lead to unpredictable outcomes. For DMT, DMT is a very short-acting molecule. Many patients will be done with their DMT experience in 6 to 10 minutes, very rapid. And that very rapid plasma spike can often lead to patients being disoriented or can induce anxiety in itself. So the analogs and the derivatives that we've been working on, re-engineering these molecules, have been designed to overcome many of these challenges for classical psychedelics, and at the same time generating novel intellectual property to protect the investments that we're making in these programs. Over the past year or so, Cybin has grown significantly. The team has grown from 5 employees to 55 across 4 countries. We're headquartered in Toronto, have a lab and a science team largely in the Boston area, and operations in the UK and in Ireland, where we hold our IP. Over the past year, we've progressed our main programs, CYB3 and CYB4, significantly. CYB3 is a deuterated analog of psilocybin that we're developing for depression. We are getting close to finalizing all of the in vivo studies needed for an IND filing, and we recently held a very productive and positive meeting with the UK MHRA to discuss our planned phase 1/2A study in depression that will be starting around mid-year. We've continued to expand our IP portfolio over the last year, adding to our 3 families covering tryptamines, phenethylamines, and delivery methods, with the first issued patent coming recently for CYB4, a composition of matter patent for our deuterated DMT molecule with protection out to 2041. We've gained approval with our partner Kernel to use their Kernel Flow device in a first of its kind neuroimaging study evaluating psychedelics, and we expect the first patient to be in that study this quarter. Back in December, we launched our Embark psychedelic facilitator study in partnership with the University of Washington. This is a phase 2 study in healthcare providers that are facing clinical depression and burnout. We will take the learnings from the Embark program forward into our CYB3 MDD study later this year. Interestingly, we were looking to recruit 30 patients into that study, and already there's a waiting list of over 1,000 patients. We've completed more than 140 preclinical studies in the last year, progressing all of our molecules CYB3, CYB4, and CYB5 closer to the clinic. And then recently we announced a partnership with the Chopra Foundation, working with them and their reach into opinion leaders, thought leaders, policymakers, to help build awareness not only of the challenges of mental health, but also the potential for psychedelic therapies in treating these conditions. Of course, to do all this work and to run our studies later this year, we need a strong team. Our team comes from across the industry and academia and from regulators, including the FDA, and has a combined 400 years of drug development experience. The team has managed 60 development programs with the FDA, including part of the team was responsible for creating the esketamine molecule that's now marketed by J&J as Spravato. So 3 main programs, and I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail. CYB3 is our deuterated analog of psilocybin that's designed to overcome some of those challenges that I mentioned. We are close to finishing all the preclinical work. Plan to file an IND in the second quarter of this year and launch our phase 1/2A study in patients with major depressive disorder around the middle of 2022. CYB4, which is our deuterated version of DMT, this is our patent protected molecule. We also plan to launch a pilot study later this year in quarter 3 with a regulatory filing coming up in quarter 2. And then CYB5, which I'll talk a little bit about later, is a non-psychiatry asset that seems to have anti-inflammatory properties at quite low doses, so non-psychedelic doses that could have utility perhaps in conditions involving neuroinflammation like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and multiple sclerosis. I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time talking about the market and the unmet need, but needless to say that all of us likely know someone that's been impacted by depression or anxiety disorders or some kind of substance use. 900 million people collectively around the world, with many treatments being lacking in terms of either their effects or their side effects. Now, as you think about CYB3, which is our deuterated analog of psilocybin, the rationale for this work is based upon decades of studies that have been performed in academia. Highlighting just 3 studies here from Johns Hopkins, from NYU, and from Imperial College. And there are many others available that indicate strong evidence for efficacy using psilocybin. So CYB3 is an analog of psilocybin where we've applied deuteration to overcome some of the challenges that I've spoken about. And deuteration is simply replacing one or more of the hydrogen atoms on the molecule with deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. The deuteration helps with reduced pharmacokinetic variability, or essentially metabolic stabilization. It improves bioavailability and helps get the molecule into the brain, into the site of action more rapidly. And of course, at the same time, generating a novel NCE. When we look at preclinical data for CYB3, when compared to classical psilocybin, you can see on the chart on the right just how variable psilocybin can be. These are plasma levels of psilocin, and you can see on the gold line the psilocin that's coming from psilocybin. The data is really all over the place, really quite broad, whereas the data set for CYB3 is much tighter. Overall, CYB3 was 50% less variable, but at peak hours for psilocybin, say hour 1 and hour 2, you can see that the CYB3 data is about 80% less variable. And that tighter data set has the potential to lead to more predictable patient outcomes and potentially fewer adverse events. You can also see here on this chart that CYB3 gets down, the concentrations get down below the therapeutic window around 2.5 hours or so. Whereas with psilocybin, the plasma levels are still going strong at 4 hours. indicating a much shorter duration. In fact, when we compare duration of CYB3 to classical psilocybin, we see that CYB3 has the potential to enable patients to be in the clinic for half of the time. A CYB3 onset of action is twice as fast as oral psilocybin, and the duration of effects are cut in half when compared to oral psilocybin, making CYB3 more scalable and therefore potentially more accessible to patients. As we complete our preclinical work and move to an IND filing, we're planning now for a phase 1/2A study with CYB3 beginning around mid-year. This will be a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled phase 1/2A design. All participants in the study will receive 2 doses, either 2 doses of active or 1 dose of placebo and 1 dose of active. Response and remission rates will be assessed at week 3 after the first dose and at week 6 after the second dose. And we'll be addressing and measuring effects on depression using the MADRS scale, and of course collecting safety and PK data. The goal of the study is to rapidly escalate CYB3 into patients, looking at the effective dose, and using a number of cohorts will allow us to characterize the full dose response curve. We'll collect PK and safety data in a large number of exposures, around 60 exposures in this study. So a lot of data from a small study. And we'll be able to evaluate the benefits of using more than 1 dose of CYB3. And the basis for that is when we look at the most impressive studies with psilocybin from Johns Hopkins and NYU, each of those studies that yielded high response rates and long durability of effects, many of them lasting months at a time. Each of those studies used more than 1 dose. So looking to repeat those results here. CYB4 is our deuterated version of DMT. This is a molecule that we're developing for anxiety disorders in combination with a nebulizer platform and an inhalation platform. DMT is not orally bioavailable and therefore is often given using an IV, which of course is not necessarily something that patients will find appealing. What we found with the duration of DMT is we're able to reduce the dose for better safety because CYB4 gets to the site of action into the brain more effectively. And we're seeing with CYB4 that the half-life when compared to DMT is about 3 times. So that means that patients that would typically have a 6 to 10 minute experience with IV DMT could have a treatment duration of around 30 minutes with CYB4, 30 minutes or so. We'll see as we get into humans. And as CYB4 and DMT get out of the body, or cleared from the body very quickly, it could mean that patients can be in and out of the clinic and back to their normal day in less than an hour. So, but with a smoother journey and with reduced potential for disorientation and anxiety that can be caused by the rapid plasma spike of traditional DMT. So again, duration here working to overcome some of those challenges of DMT, and we're looking to plan a study later this year. CYB5, as I mentioned, has neuroinflammatory properties. This is obviously non-core for Cybin, as we're focusing on psychiatric conditions. We expect to have data for CYB5, more data that we can share around about the end of the second quarter this year, and we've already begun partnership discussions with a number of pharmaceutical companies to discuss how we might take this molecule forward in the most cost-effective way. So a busy year ahead for Cybin as we work to develop these psychedelic molecules into therapeutics. For CYB3, we're just about done with all of the in vivo studies needed for an IND filing, and that IND filing will happen in the second quarter, so just a couple of months from now. and then we'll be kicking off the MDD phase 1/2A study around mid-year, with the expectation that we'll have PK and safety data before the end of 2022. We've started our co-sponsored EMBARK study at the University of Washington back in December, and the learnings from that EMBARK study will contribute to the deployment of EMBARK in our CYB3 study later this year. And we expect to initiate the kernel flow first patient in around the end of this quarter. In terms of CYB4, we expect preclinical data early in the second quarter. We're just wrapping up some of that now, comparing CYB4 to DMT, with a plan to submit a regulatory filing in Europe for CYB4 and a pilot study around the second or third quarter. And then for CYB5, around the end of the second quarter, we expect to present a preclinical package supporting neuroinflammation and continue to have discussions with pharma companies around partnering that particular asset. So to wrap up, Cybin clearly has a very strong and experienced management and R&D team. We have built about 50 partnerships now around the world, including world-class scientists, CROs, chemical synthesis, an ecosystem that has enabled us to progress a pipeline of about 50 molecules in both Europe and the US. We have multiple active programs for depression and anxiety disorders that we plan to move into the clinic this year, with our first phase 1/2A human study for CYB3 starting around mid-year. We have a strong and growing IP portfolio, 3 patent families, and those patents now are beginning to issue, as we've seen with CYB4. So really a transformational year for Cybin as we move from being a preclinical company to a clinical company, clearly high value inflection point. And we thank you for your interest and your support in Cybin. Thank you very much.